We'll finish off our examination of this kingdom Protista that is out there by looking at some amoeba-like supergroups that are out there, including the Rhizaria and the Amoebozoa, and then we'll finish off looking at some of the characteristics of the algae that are out there. But when we look at this, there are two distinct differences for these supergroups, even though they are both amoeba-like organisms that are out there. And when you look at them, the Rhizaria are amoeba that actually have really thin pseudopods. So I'm going to jump back. Imagine these little pseudopods, the extensions of the cell membrane that they're sending out there. And when you look at the Rhizaria, they're divided up into two groups depending on the shells that they have surrounding the amoeba and giving them protection. The foramnifera, or the forams that are out there, have the calcium carbonate shells, and you can see these small holes where the amoeba can basically send out this really small fake foot to grab onto things and bring it back. With the radiolarians, the difference here is these guys have silica shells around the outside, and they have these stiff bundles of microtubules that are going to be used to form those pseudopods that can then be sent out to grab on to things in the surrounding area there and bring them in for ingestion. When you look in the Amoebozoa group, this is what we're used to thinking about when we think about amoeba. They're blobs that are crawling around, sending out their pseudopods, and this is Amoeba proteus, and the name comes from the Greek god for Proteus that could change his shape there. And so these blobs are different from the Rhizaria that we saw before because they don't have those protective shells. These are free moving blobs that are out there. And when we look, we can find a couple of different types. And these are just some of the pathogenic ones that are out there. Some of them are free living, so you can find the amoeba crawling around. And when they get inside of you, if you get acanthamoeba, they can cause keratitis, which is basically inflammation of your cornea that can result in blindness. And a few years ago, there was some contact lens cleaning solutions that people were using that turns out were contaminated with acanthamoeba. And these people were literally squirting the amoeba onto their contact lenses to clean and disinfect them. And then they put the contact lens on their eyeball. And these things could get into your eye, and they would crawl around to the back where they got access to your optic nerve. And that is a direct route straight into your brain. When you look at the Naegleria down here, these ones are also going to get access to your brain, and they're found out there in fresh waters, and so you're more likely to pick up something like this in a hot tub. Actually, is where I read about a case in Australia where 5 people went in a hot tub that was the wrong pH, so the bleach wasn't working, and all 5 of them ended up with an amoeba that ended up in their brain, and 4 of them died as a result of that infection. More likely, you're more likely to run into Entamoeba histolytica that is out there because this is going to produce amoebic dysentery, and it's spread in cysts that are going to be produced in your intestines, and then they will shoot out in your feces because you've got a nasty case of diarrhea. And then those cysts can be transmitted to other people where we digest off that outside covering and release our trophozoite that is your amoeba that can actually cross the wall of your intestines, and thus the name histo is tissue and lytica is lysis or breaking. So this intestinal amoeba will actually break your tissues apart, and that's part of what causes that dysentery or diarrhea there. All right, so we'll switch gears again a little bit and look at another organism that is amoeba-like when we look at some of these. And these guys fit into a subgroup that is known as the Eumycetozoa. And so U is true, Mycetes is fungus, and then the zoa is animals. And so an interesting little group of organisms that have fungus-like characteristics, but it turns out they are more animal-like in their characteristics that are out there. And here we can see some examples. This is a slime mold, so it does look like a mold. If you look at this thing over here, really funky structure. It looks kind of slimy, but it's also mold-like. but there are some distinct differences from members of the fungus kingdom that cause the slime molds to get reclassified. Again, there's that genetic difference that we can see when we look at the phylogenetic tree. But also, when you look at this, these guys are going to have an active form that is diploid. The fungus, remember, is only diploid when it's going through sexual reproduction. Cell walls are found in fungi. These guys don't have cell walls. They are going to be able to ingest their food through phagocytosis due to that lack of cell walls that are out there. And they come in two sort of flavors. This is one of them. It's known as a Plasmodial slime mold. And here you can see this Plasmodium, this large supercell that has actually got multiple nuclei that are scattered throughout here. So this can actually be one single cell right here, and it's diploid in nature. And this one, the common name is dog vomit, because people see this and they think that a dog threw up there, and it reeks to high heaven because they are decomposing some of the organic litter that is around here. And when these guys go through replication, they do make sporangia, which is a structure that we saw when we were looking at the fungi earlier. And inside of these sporangia, those sacs right there, you will find haploid spores. So similar to what we find with the fungus kingdom that is out there. And you can take a look at this figure in the textbook, and we'll go through this to see some of what's going on here. And so we'll start out over here with this young sporangium that is diploid. So it's got two copies of the chromosomes in the cells. And that sporangium goes through meiosis, and that is going to produce your haploid spores right here. And those haploid spores are going to get released, and they land somewhere that has got some water, and that helps to break open that coating around the outside of that. And what crawls out is an amoeba-like organism right here. And you can see some of them are amoeboid cells over here. They're going to blob around eating things, but also some of them are going to come out and they have flagella. So really a weird kind of thing right here. And they can convert between these two forms, from the swimming form to the blob form right there. And these cells can fuse together, remember, haploid cells, and this is effectively sperm and egg. So there is your process of fertilization that is giving you your diploid cells again. So they go from haploid to diploid form. And the diploid form is going to grow up and make that plasmodium that is effectively doing schizogony. You end up with this multinucleated mass of cell right here, and some of these things can be kilometers across in the forest, and they're just going to be decomposing things in the surrounding area there. And when things become unfavorable, that plasmodium is going to go ahead and go through this process of making a sporangium so that they can do meiosis and make the spores that are going to be resistant to that adverse environment. So they've come up with some strategies to allow them to survive when the environment is good, and also when the environment is bad, so that you can go into that dormant stage right there. The other version of these guys is really kind of freaky. It's known as a cellular slime mold, and most of their lifetime is going to be spent as amoeba-like organisms, and they're going to blob around, and they're going to be eating bacteria and other things by phagocytosis. And when we look at them, they look kind of similar to the Plasmodium, but we do see some distinct differences to distinguish them. So we'll start out in the same idea here, that they make this sporangium that is going to have haploid spores inside of them. And when we look at this process right here, they are going to release the spores, and your amoeba is going to crawl out, and the amoeba can blob around and eat these little microscopic forms of life that is out there. And you can see right here that the amoeba can go through the process of fusing together, and they can become diploid cells, and they can go back through meiosis to release these haploid cells. This is one version of what the cellular slime molds can do right here. But also, these cells can fuse together, and when you look at this process right here, that is the same kind of fertilization that we saw before, and that's going to give us our diploid zygote right here, your fertilized egg cell, and those guys will blob around. And when resources actually become scarce, so they run out of food, there is actually a signal that is released that causes these amoeba to aggregate. And here you can actually see a photomicrograph of the aggregation. So all those little amoeba are blobbing together, and they will eventually make something known as a slug. And when you look at this, it is like the size of fingernail clippings, and it's not going to move very fast. Think about 2 millimeters per hour. So that's 2 hair lengths per hour that this amoeba is moving around. But effectively, what this is a big pile of all of these individual cells right there. And those cells are going to be able to go through that process of making that sporangium right there with your fruiting bodies inside of it. And so here you can see that plasmodium kind of form. But remember, this came from single cells, thus the cellular slime mold right there. So when we're looking at this, again, I want you to focus on what is different about these different groups of organisms that allows us to distinguish the plasmodial slime mold from the cellular slime mold. How are the slime molds different from the water molds, different from the authentic molds that are out there? And we'll finish up chapter 5 with one more video where we're going to take a look at some of the features of algae that are out there.